The first note almost broke him. It slipped from the old upright piano like a fragile memory, thin and trembling, as if unsure it still belonged in the world. Daniel Harper's fingers hovered over the yellowed keys. His breath caught somewhere between his ribs and his regret. He hadn't meant to play that song. Not that one. Behind him, the community center hummed with the low noise of folding chairs, scraping, and parents chatting before the fundraiser began. A banner reading, "Winter Food Drive, Thank You for Giving," sagged slightly over the stage. Snow pressed against the tall windows, muting the city beyond into something softer, almost kind. Daniel swallowed. The second note followed the first, and across the room, 3 little girls went perfectly still. Ava dropped the paper snowflake she'd been cutting. Emma's giggle died mid-breath. Lily, the smallest by 3 minutes, lifted her head slowly, like she was hearing a voice from underwater. They didn't look at the piano. They looked at each other, because they knew that melody. They knew it in the marrow of their bones. It was the song their father used to hum. Daniel didn't see their faces at first. He was staring at the keys, at the faint scratch on middle C, at the place where the wood had splintered years ago. His hands were shaking. He hadn't touched a piano in nearly a decade, not since the night the hospital hallway swallowed his best friend whole. Not since the night he'd promised he would help raise the girls. The melody wrapped around him before he could stop it. It wasn't complicated, just a simple tune, the kind you hum while washing dishes or tucking children into bed. It had no name that Daniel knew of. Marcus had written it in college, tapping it absent-mindedly on cafeteria tables, grinning when Daniel told him it sounded like something you'd hear at the end of a movie when everyone finally forgives each other. Marcus used to hum it constantly. He hummed it when he met Elise. He hummed it the night the triplets were born, pacing the maternity ward with wild, exhausted joy in his eyes. He hummed it 3 years ago, sitting in a hospital bed, his voice thinner than the IV lines taped to his arms. Daniel's chest tightened. Across the room, Ava's hand found Emma's. Lily's lower lip began to tremble. "Do you hear that?" Emma whispered. Ava nodded. "It's Daddy's song." Elise heard them and turned sharply. She'd been stacking donation boxes near the entrance, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun, exhaustion permanently carved into the corners of her eyes. For a moment, she didn't understand what they meant. Then she heard it, and the color drained from her face. Daniel kept playing, unaware that the air had changed. He wasn't performing. He wasn't even thinking. The song had simply found him, slipped through the cracks he'd tried so carefully to seal. He remembered the night Marcus first played it on a battered guitar in their tiny apartment in Chicago. Remembered laughing, throwing a pillow at him. "You're going to play that at your wedding," Daniel had teased. Marcus had grinned. "Nah, I'll just hum it when I'm nervous." He had hummed it while waiting at the altar. Daniel hit a wrong note and flinched, but the melody kept going. Softer now, slower. A chair scraped loudly across the floor. Daniel looked up. 3 identical pairs of eyes stared at him from the center of the room. Not curious, not confused, devastated. He froze. Ava's voice came first, small and shaking. "Why do you know that song?" The room went silent in a way that felt sacred. Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't prepared for this. He hadn't even known the song would surface. For 3 years he'd locked it away because it hurt too much to touch. Elise walked toward the stage as if moving through water. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice carrying 1,000 unspoken things. The girls took slow steps forward together, their boots thudding against the wooden floor in perfect unison. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Daddy used to hum that when we were scared." Daniel stood abruptly, the piano bench scraping behind him. I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't think—" "How do you know it?" Emma pressed, her small fists clenched at her sides. "Because I was there when he wrote it. Because he was my brother in every way that mattered. Because I miss him every single day." Daniel knelt so he was eye level with them. His voice was rough. "Your dad and I went to college together. He wrote that song a long time ago." The girls' faces crumpled in unison. "He never wrote it down," Ava whispered. "I know," Daniel said. Elise reached them, her hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. Tears shone in her eyes, but she was smiling, fragile and stunned. Marcus used to say it wasn't finished, she said quietly. He said he'd finish it when the girls were old enough to sing with him. Daniel felt something inside him crack open. I found an old recording, he admitted, last month, on a flash drive he gave me years ago. I didn't even know it was there. That wasn't entirely true. He had known about the flash drive. He'd just been too afraid to open it. After Marcus passed, Daniel had buried himself in work, in distance, in anything that kept him from feeling the sharp edge of loss. He showed up for birthdays and school plays, helped with math homework, fixed leaky faucets. He did everything except talk about Marcus, except remember him out loud. The girls had stopped humming the melody eventually. Grief does that. It steals songs first. I've been practicing it, Daniel continued, his voice steadier now. Trying to remember how he played it. Lily stepped closer. Can you play it again? Daniel looked at Elise. She nodded. He returned to the piano, hands trembling but determined. This time he didn't rush. He let each note breathe. Let the melody rise and fall the way Marcus had taught him. And this time he heard something else. A soft hum. Small at first. Then 3 voices. The girls stood side by side, their harmonies imperfect but fearless. They didn't know the ending. Neither did Daniel. So he kept playing, following instinct, letting the music carry them somewhere new. People in the audience wiped their eyes. A man in the back removed his hat. The melody swelled, not louder but fuller. Elise covered her mouth with both hands. When the final note faded, silence hung in the air like a held breath. Then Lily ran forward and wrapped her arms around Daniel's waist. "Thank you," she whispered. Emma and Ava followed. Daniel held them as carefully as if they were made of glass. He realized then that he hadn't just played a song. He had opened a door. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in their small, grieving world. Daniel began coming over every Thursday evening, not just to fix things or sign permission slips, but to sit at the old keyboard in Elise's living room. The girls would gather around him, notebooks open, tongues sticking out in concentration, as they tried to write lyrics to a melody that had once felt too sacred to touch. They argued about rhymes. They giggled over silly lines. They cried once or twice. Daniel let them. One night, Ava looked up from her notebook. "Uncle Daniel?" He blinked. She'd never called him that before. "Yeah? Do you think Daddy can hear us?" The question landed gently but heavily. Daniel glanced at Elise, who stood in the doorway holding a dish towel, waiting. He thought about Marcus, about hospital rooms and laughter and unfinished songs. "I think," Daniel said slowly, "that love doesn't disappear just because someone does. I think when we sing something he created, when we remember him, that love gets louder." Emma considered this. "So it's like we're finishing it for him?" Daniel smiled. "Exactly." Spring came early that year. The community center announced another fundraiser, this time bigger, with a small stage and local news coverage. Elise hesitated when the organizer suggested the girls perform. "They're only 7, she said, but the girls insisted. "It's Daddy's song," Lily said simply. On the night of the event, the room was packed. Fairy lights hung from the ceiling. The piano had been tuned. Daniel stood backstage with the girls, adjusting Lily's bow, smoothing Emma's collar, squeezing Ava's hand. "You ready?" he asked. They nodded. Elise knelt in front of them. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "your dad would be so proud." Daniel took his place at the piano under warm stage lights. The girls stood beside him, hands linked. He began to play. This time the melody didn't tremble, it soared. When the girls started singing the lyrics they'd written, about bedtime, stories and scraped knees, about courage and laughter, and humming in the dark, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Halfway through, Daniel felt his vision blur. He kept playing. At the final chorus, the girls' voices rang clear and strong. "We'll carry your song when the night feels long. We'll hum it brave and true. And every note we sing will bring our hearts back home to you." The last chord echoed. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then the audience rose to its feet. Applause thundered through the hall, not just for the music, but for the love woven into it. Daniel looked at the girls. They weren't frozen anymore. They were glowing. Elise joined them on stage, wrapping all 4 of them in her arms. Daniel felt something settle inside him, something that had been restless for years. Grief was still there. It probably always would be. But so was this. Connection, kindness, the quiet, stubborn power of showing up. Later, as the crowd thinned and volunteers packed up chairs, a little boy approached the stage with his grandmother. "My dad died last year," he said shyly to Ava. "I forgot what his laugh sounded like. But your song made me remember." Ava smiled and handed him a folded sheet of paper. "You can have the words," she said. "Maybe you can write your own." Daniel watched the exchange, his heart full. Marcus had once told him that music was just another way of saying, "I'm here with you." Standing in that community center, surrounded by the echo of a once-forgotten melody, Daniel understood what his friend had meant. He hadn't just played a song that night months ago. He had chosen to remember. He had chosen to share the weight of loss instead of carrying it alone. And in doing so, he'd helped 3 little girls find their father's voice again, not in the past, but in themselves. As they stepped out into the cool spring air, the girls skipped ahead humming softly. Not because they were sad, not because they were afraid, but because the melody belonged to them now. Daniel looked up at the dark sky scattered with stars. "Finished it for you," he murmured. The wind moved gently through the trees, almost like an answer. And beside him, Elise slipped her hand into his. Not out of desperation, not out of grief, but out of something quieter, hope.